All right, so it's about 10:30. According to my watch, the clock seems to be slow. We'll get started. In case you hadn't noticed, this is a history of the information security industry, or brief history. My name is Chris Thomas, or Space Rogue. I've done a few things in the industry. I've been around for a little bit, but that's really a big deal. Currently a strategist at Tenable Network Security. I have to mention them because they paid me to be here. So it's important to not really believe me when I'm talking up here. This is really, I've been in the industry for 20 years or so. So what I'm going to cover is really my impressions of the industry and what I think is important, and maybe I'm going to miss something that you think is important. But hopefully this gives you enough information to ask some questions and maybe go out on your own and do your own research. It's sort of chronological. It's not 100% chronological. I do start in the past and I do end up in the future, but all the stuff in the middle is kind of, however I felt it fit best together. And again, it's not 100% complete. Title page had the word brief on it there in red letters, so yeah. I only got 50 minutes to cover like 3,000 years of history, so let's start in the past. The information security industry as we know it doesn't really start until around 1980 or so, give or take. It doesn't really even get bigger for another decade after that to be measurable, I think. But as long as people have had information, they've looked for ways to store it and looked for ways to store that information away from other people, to keep secrets, if you will. Right? So once they started writing things down, they realized that they needed to keep information secure. But what good is the information if you can't share it is really the question that I ask. So we have here a picture of an early tumbler lock, circa 1000 BC, probably used on a granary, in the middle of the pyramids or something. Thank you. Jeez. Trying to get a topical joke in there. It didn't come out very good, but anyway. All right. One of the first bits of encryption, if you really want to call it that, was the Caesar cipher, a simple substitution cipher. Julius Caesar didn't invent it, but he did use it a lot, and it became popular because of that. It was named Caesar because he used it a lot. Not why it became popular. But anyway, this wasn't the first, code, but it is one of the again most popular. I'm using the same word over. All right. So you have various codes that happen. There was a code by Jefferson had an encryption device. I don't want to call it encryption because by today's standards it really wasn't. But about in 1925, this guy Arthur Scherbus invented the Enigma machine, which was an electromechanical machine. It wasn't a computer machine. It wasn't no chips in it, right? It had rotors, manually moved. It was a brilliant machine, not so much for the way that it encrypted information, but what it forced the Allies to build to defeat it, which was the bomb. Literally, it was the bomb. Designed by Alan Turing in 1940. If anybody here has seen the movie The Imitation Game, I almost said Incredible Mind, different movie. The Imitation Game gives you a good idea of the struggles that happened in order to build this machine and the weaknesses that were found in how the Germans were using the Enigma in order for it to be broken and all the messages to be decoded and for the Allies to win the war. But the bomb was the precursor to other electromechanical machines, the Electrical Numerical Integrator and Computer, or the ENIAC. This was really the first general-purpose computer. It was used to compute ballistic firing tables. And you had a lot of machines like this being built once the World War II was over. Right? You had the BENIAC, Colossus, Harvard Mark I. Basically, every major college or research institution built their own computer. And eventually, IBM and Honeywell and others started standardizing the systems and selling them to business to compute amortization tables and payroll. But the thing here is that none of these machines talk to each other. Right? there's really no security involved here. They're, for all intents and purposes, what we would call a single user system. The security involved locking the door. As long as the door was locked, the computer was secure, the information was secure. So there was no industry outside of door locks for computer or information security, right? That started to change around about 1960 with the AT&T data phone. This is, basically your first modem. This allows computers to talk to each other that weren't in the same building. But again, no one's really thinking about security here either, right? Because all of this data was sent over AT&T because it was the only phone company in town at the time. And of course, AT&T is secure because they said so. Right? And nobody had really even thought of what we now call man-in-the-middle attack. So really, your security, again, is still the physical aspect. Right? You're still dealing with locked doors and physical access into the systems. Little side note here, I don't have this in here, but the MIT Lockpicking Club, this is how they got their start, right? They wanted to get into the computers to use them, and so they needed to learn how to pick locks so they could get into the room where the computer was. And if you download the MIT Lockpicking Guide, I think it says something about that in there. But that was the whole reason for the MIT Lockpicking Club, and one of the reasons why we still do lockpicking at conferences now was because the physical security, it was such an important part of the information security, and it still is. But we're still dealing with single-user machines. They're talking to each other over the phone lines. And it wasn't until Multix, Multiplex Information and Computing Service, one of the very first, if not I think it was the first, multiple-user operating system. The picture here is of a GE 645, I believe. Now, Multix was started in '64. Bell Labs quit the project in 1970. Most of the engineers that worked on Multix went on to create Unix. So a lot of people think that Multix, they say Multix was a failure, right? Oh, it was a bad operating system. But most of the features that were in Multix eventually found their way into Unix. Right, the last commercial installation of Multix wasn't turned off until 2000. And it was released as open source in 2006. So Multix is still kind of around a little bit, but this is really where we start thinking about information security in a computer-type mind work. I can't think of the word. Anyway. So now we have a multi-user operating system. We have ways for computers to communicate with each other. And of course, that results in the internet. This map is actually from 1971, but the ARPANET was started in 1970. Basically, you had 4 nodes in 1970, and by 1971, you had 18 nodes. Notice here you have a cluster around Boston and a cluster around San Francisco. If you've ever read Stephen Levy's book, Hackers, he goes into great detail about the East Coast versus West Coast, hippies versus suits, and it's an interesting dichotomy there, the East and West, and how the computer and the internet grew. But anyway, it's a side traffic. So here security again starts to become more of a concern. All right, we don't have an industry at all. We don't have anybody selling security yet. But everyone's either an academic or they're in the military. You have trusted endpoints. You have known users. It's not really that big a deal, right? Because there's nobody's thinking about man-in-the-middle attacks. Nobody's thinking about all these other types of attacks that we have today because everybody knows everybody else on the internet. There's only 18 endpoints. Each endpoint maybe has, a dozen or 2 dozen users. You're not really concerned about bad guys intercepting your traffic. A lot of that starts to change in 1981 with the introduction of the IBM PC. It was introduced, retail price for the PC was $1,565. The Hayes modem, 300 baud. I don't know, some of you probably don't understand what a baud is, but it was slow. You download a web page now in a couple of seconds, and it's full of graphics and animations and all that. And you take one of those pictures and try to download it at 300 baud, it would take like an hour. But the Hayes Smart Modem retailed for $299. So here you have a complete computing system for under $2,000, basically very much affordable, comparably speaking. And shortly after this, you have Tandy, you have Atari, Apple, Commodore, et cetera, all quickly followed. and built their own computers, and you have the start of the personal computer industry. All right, so we've now jumped from 1000 BC to 1981, and we really haven't done any security stuff whatsoever. Industry-wise, right? Nobody's selling anything. That starts to change in the 70s. All right, so I see, not chronological. I was at 81, now I'm at 77. I want to say their names. Ron Rivest, Adi Shamir, and Leonard Adelman developed RSA security, building off the work of Whit Diffie and Hellman, and I forgot his first name. Anyway, the Diffie-Hellman key exchange. I'm sorry? Martin Hellman? Thank you very much. Those are important names. I want to make sure I get them out there. So the Diffie-Hellman key exchange is the basis of the RSA algorithm. And they developed an algorithm in 1977, but they didn't found the company until 1982. Cryptography at this point was basically the realm of the NSA. They owned all the crypto, and they didn't really want any of the crypto to get out. And so they had the RSA guys had a really hard time basically fighting the NSA to be able to develop an algorithm that they could use and sell to promote security. Because at this point, we know we have the internet, and we know that there's going to be commerce on the internet. And so with Diffie, Martin Hellman, the RSA guys, they all realized like the only way that we're going to be able to have communication and commerce on the internet is the way that we can secure it. And so we need to find a way to secure this communication. And so that was one of the motivations behind developing these strong encryption algorithms. If you really want to learn more about the whole crypto revolution of the 70s and 80s, Crypto, How the Code Rebels Beat the Government, Saving Privacy in the Digital Age by Stephen Levy. Excellent book. Really gets into the nitty-gritty details of the behind-the-scenes political mess that cryptography was. But this really is the birth of the security industry, RSA and secure computing. Secure computing basically came out of Honeywell. Honeywell was a mini mainframe computer vendor in the 70s and 80s, and they IPO'd in 95. I believe, I don't remember who ended up buying them. I'm sorry, McAfee? Bought Secure Computing? Okay. Yeah, I knew some people that worked there back in the late 90s. So, anyway, this is really the start of the industry, as it were. Yeah, Secure Computing was basically an NSA contractor. And it took them several years to morph from NSA contractor into a commercial product sector. All right, so let's back up a little bit more. Blue box, circa 1970. I mentioned the blue box because while it really has nothing to do with the industry, it does have a lot to do with the industry, which I know makes no sense. Basically, you have famously Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak building blue boxes to sell them so that they can build Apple Computer, or use the money to build Apple Computer. But this also starts the phreaker movement. And this becomes more important later on, but your phreakers, people who explored the phone systems for fun mostly, I suppose there was some profit there, but people who explored the phone systems would later became your hackers. And then now with Wi-Fi and cellular, became your phreakers again. So it's kind of a full circle thing. And I'll bring this back up again in a minute. Another thing that's important to the industry, I think, 1983, Wargames. This is a major movie to a lot of people who are in industry today. This motivated a lot of people to get started in computers and information security, although in the 80s we didn't call it information security, it was just computers. But a lot of people would not be where they are now without this movie. This movie is also one of the reasons for the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act of 1986. A lot of people thought this movie was inspired by Kevin Mitnick, when it's kind of actually the opposite. When Kevin Mitnick's prosecutor mentioned in his trial that Kevin could whistle into the phone and launch nuclear weapons, that was after this movie came out. And so the prosecutor probably got the idea of that from the movie, which, of course, is not true at all. Nobody can whistle into a modem, whistle modem tones into a phone. All right. Where am I? FRACK, 1985. was the first issue. But the most important issue is the FRACK 49s, or one of the most important issues, FRACK 49, Smashing the Stack for Fun and Profit by Aliaf1, Elias Levy. This is really where you start seeing security information being broadly disseminated. There's no industry here, because up until this point, really, security information was a tightly held, closely knit secret among your major sysadmins at major universities and corporations. And they had special private mailing lists where if somebody found a bug, they would mail everybody and say, hey, I found a bug in this OS, but don't tell anybody else because I don't want anybody breaking my system. And it was all very tribal knowledge-y. And this sort of got the information outside the tribe into other people's hands. And was, again, a great motivation for a lot of people. There was a lot of papers that came after this. Buffer overflows for fun and profit comes to mind, that were directly inspired by this one, Smashing the Stack for Fun and Profit. The other thing that FRACK did that was very important is that it created a community of freakers who have now sort of morphed into hackers, right? Because of the articles in FRACK called the FRACK World News, and all the technical topics that the e-zine covered, it wasn't just sharing of information. It gave the readers of the magazine sort of a sense of shared identity. Because you would read these news articles that were in the FRACK World News about something happening across the country where a bulletin board system gets raided, or the phone company gets somebody else arrested for blue boxing or what have you, and it sort of brings a community together. Because by and large, most of the people who are reading FRACK are doing so on their local bulletin board systems. Yes, there are some people who are abusing the phone system and dialing long distance and calling boards around the country. But for the most part, a lot of people are local, and they're not making these long-distance calls, and they're stuck on their local bulletin board systems. And they would get a copy of the FRACK World of FRACK and read it and sort of have that sense of community. And so again, because, and I'll get to this later, your hackers then become your industry later on. So really, the very first big major security event, the first breach, if you will, and this, if you compared it to today, I would equate it to the size of Target or OPM. Right? The Robert, I always want to call it the Tappan Morris worm. I don't know why. Robert Morris worm from 1988. It was actually a very simple worm. It took advantage of weak passwords, which are still a problem today. And basically, there was a coding error that made it replicate faster than it was supposed to. And as a result, you had a denial of service across multiple sites on the internet. This made national network TV news. Most people had never heard of the internet before this. And the Morris worm changed all of that, right? Because before the Morris worm, the internet was free and open, and free love, and academics collaborating and sharing, and happy love and hippie time, right? After the Morris worm, people realized, well, bad things can happen. We need to maybe close some things up, change our passwords, use better passwords, maybe have some other security measures in place. This really starts people thinking about security, especially when you compare in conjunction with, now this was 1988, the very next year, Clifford Stoll publishes his Cuckoo's Egg book. Anybody here seen the movie or read the book? 1, 2, 3. Yeah. Go out and get the book. Or watch the movie. The movie's kind of boring, but watch it anyway. It's an interesting story because this is 1986, right? And Clifford Stoll's a sysadmin at some school somewhere, I forget where. And he's noticing some anomalies on his network, and he realizes there's somebody, after months and months and months of investigation, realizes somebody's trying to break into his network. And then basically sets up the first honeypot. The bad guys break into the honeypot, steal some documents, and then they trace it back to this guy in Ohio who, of course, denies all knowledge. But it's an interesting story, and if you're in the information security industry or want to be in the industry, I highly recommend reading this book. But again, you have, and also at the same time, I don't have a picture of them, but Bill Cheswick and Steve Bellevin were noticing a lot of attacks happening against their networks, and they were talking about them. And so it starts to become an awareness on the internet of what's going on that people hadn't realized before, or that's starting to go on, and that it isn't all peace, love, and understanding, and collaboration, and academia, and everybody loves everybody. That there is other stuff that's happening that's not good, and that people need to be aware of that. So that's all in the late 80s. Oh, I guess we're still in the late 80s. All right. But remember, we have the birth of the personal computer revolution in, 82, 83? 81 was PC, right? IBM PC in 1981. So by 1986, we have the first, well, it's debatable whether it's the first. Some say it was Creeper virus in 1971, which hit the PDP-10. Some say it was an Apple II virus called Elk Cloner that hit in 1982. But the brain virus was one of the really first widespread viruses. Hit the PC computing platform. But within a year after the brain virus, you had viruses on Amiga, which was the SCA virus, which I think was the first one. The Mac platform had a virus, Enver A or Enver B, I don't remember which one it was. That was in 1987. So shortly after you have the first major virus in PC land in 1986, you have the birth of the antivirus industry. So these bloodsuckers have been around for a very long time. 1987, McAfee, F-Secure in 88, Semantic Antivirus from Macintosh in 89. This is really the start of the industry. It starts with antivirus. Yes, we have RSA, we have some computing already, but these people are making money, like lots of money. RSA doesn't really make a lot of money until they can sell their algorithm to Lotus, which is a few years, I think it's right about the same time. And they had a big fight selling it to Lotus. This is where your regular user, your PC home user, starts to think about security. And they think, oh, I'm going to buy this one product, and I'll be all safe. And, gee, they still do that today. But anyway. So in 1989, we also have the introduction of the World Wide Web. Right? The internet was around, but of course it was all FTP and Gopher and IRC and Usenet. Most of those protocols basically don't exist anymore because they've all been replaced by HTTP. So Mosaic was announced or released in 1989, but you really didn't see the web take off until 94, 93, 95, that time frame. But this really opened the door to the internet to non-technical users. Prior to this, you really had to have a little bit of arcane knowledge at least to try to configure your machine to be on the internet. I mean, I remember trying to set up TCP/IP and set up IP addresses on a Mac, an OS 7, and it just like, you had to know subnet masks and all these crazy numbers that you had to figure out. But the web, Mosaic really made it simple, point and click. Anybody can get on. Anybody can click stuff. All right. Let's talk about a little bit more of the influences in the early days. All right, I put Loft up there. I was a member of Loft. We really didn't start doing security stuff until maybe 94 or 95. Loft Crack, which is a product we wrote, didn't come out until like 96 or 97. And I put it up there not to toot my own horn, but it seems to have had a bigger influence than I like to or seem to remember it having. So it's added. DEF CON 1 had 100 people. It now has over 15,000. If you've never been to DEF CON, it's the largest hacker gathering in the world. I recommend everybody go at least once and then never ever go again. It's an experience, and if you're new to the industry or if it's you should go one time. And same for RSA. But DEF CON is important because it spawned the Black Hat conferences, right? Which is actually a major conference in the industry. RSA was started in '91, and when it started, though, it was mostly about crypto. It wasn't about security in general. Remember, RSA, basically their only product at the time was cryptography. They were selling different algorithms, and so their conference was mostly about cryptography. By '93, however, just 2 years after they first started, they had already expanded to be more general include a broader range of security. And sneakers, like Wargames, had a major impact on the people in the industry today. It was a very moving movie for myself, and it was basically interesting to see people who are getting paid to do the things that I was doing for fun. And I think, I think it had somewhat of an impact on Loft as a whole as to why we sort of went a little bit commercial. But anyway, it's an important movie and impacted a lot of people. All right, let's get back to the industry. Up until now, like I said, the information security was basically tribal knowledge. It was passed from one sysadmin to another. It was shared on mailing lists. If you were a sysadmin, you would try to find out the security problems and the products that you were admitting. But there weren't any companies selling anything, right, other than antivirus. So the firewall idea, the idea of the firewall had been floating around for a while. But the first actual product brought to market was developed by Marcus Raynham. And Marcus' famous quote here, Deck Seal, was interesting because it had a part number and a manual and a corporation behind it. And so this is really one of the first non-antivirus products that you have for sale. And again, your beginning of your industry. Also, that was followed closely by Checkpoint, which had Firewall 1 in '93. And they still use the same logo. And they need some marketing people, I think. Yeah, they need a new logo. But anyway, that was '93. So by '94, right, you have Firewalls and Internet Security by Cheswick and Belevin. Remember, I already mentioned them. They had been basically talking back and forth and publishing information on the Internet, populating news groups and mailing lists. And these guys were, this was a really important book because, again, it really got people to think about security and like, oh, I really need to do something about this because I'm on the internet now and there are other people than just academics and military people here. So, maybe I actually need to do something. So this was an important book and helped, again, motivate the industry. Kevin Mitnick, 95. 95 was a big year. A lot of stuff happened in 95. Satan. Satan was huge. It was released by Dan Farmer and, I can't pronounce his name, West Venema. Did I get that right? Close enough. It was cutting edge at the time, but it was really just a vulnerability scanner. Right? It's a basic, simple vulnerability scanner. It had a cool name, Security Administrative Tool for Analyzing Networks. Press picked up on this a lot, mostly because of the name, I think, and the fact that it was called Satan. I think people underestimate the importance of having a good name when it comes to marketing your product. It scared people. Satan really scared people. They got threats from the DOJ, Department of Justice, but it was an important tool to have come out because it didn't really come out from a company, right? But what did come out from a company was VeriSign, which was spun off from RSA. VeriSign is important because they were selling SSL certs, right? Certificate IDs. By '96, everyone was using VeriSign IDs. Netscape, Visa, AOL, IBM, Microsoft, they all had products, certs from VeriSign. Of course, we now know SSL is hopelessly broken. But at the time, it was important. 95 again, Netscape Navigator comes out. And it supports SSL. This is what helped VeriSign sell so many certs. You have the NSF lifting its prohibition on commercial activity on the internet. If this had never happened, we wouldn't have Amazon, right? Because right after they did that, Amazon and eBay, or Auction Web, was founded. And so now we have credit card numbers on the internet. And if that didn't help this industry, I don't know what did. Also in the late 90s, we have a bunch of laws that get passed. HIPAA, COPA, DMCA, Health Information Privacy Accountability. Did I spell that right? There's not. I can never remember if it's two P's or two A's. And I know it's really bad form to get it wrong. COPA, Child Online, Privacy and Protection Act, and Digital Millennium Copyright Act. And the New York Times was defaced in 1999. Hacking for Girlies. I liked this defacement. This was awesome. Has a cool graphic, right? It has awesome notes in the HTML. If you read the HTML, there was actually a message behind it. It wasn't just defacement for the sake of defacing. Really, every defacement group should hire an artist, I think. But anyway. The other things that happened in the late 90s was I don't know what to really call it, the worm craziness, because they just every other month you had a new one, right? I got a few of them up here: Melissa, I Love You, Code Red, Nimda, Blaster, Sasser, MyDoom, and this is just a small sample. Like every other week, it seemed like there was another big worm that was coming out that was taking down massive networks due to denial of services and interrupting important systems. And Antivirus, of course, could do nothing about this because they're a bunch of shills. But these guys are important, and I think I have these later on because they force some other big companies to do some stuff, and we'll get to that in another slide. Major impact on the industry, Y2K. Which people think, Y2K, that has nothing to do with security. But the fear over Y2K was huge. And for those of you that don't remember, Y2K was the year 2000 bug, where software coders had coded a 2-digit variable for 99 and did not, and when things flipped over in 2000, and they didn't have a 4-digit variable there, everything was going to break and go to hell, and planes were going to fall from the sky, and the world was going to end and spin off into space. Whether or not the problem was real or as big as it was feared, the fear was real. The fear was huge. I remember in Somerville, Massachusetts, they were afraid that the stoplights would stop working. Whether or not they actually had a date function in them or not, I don't see why they would, but they started putting stop signs up at every 4-way intersection because they were afraid that people were going to just forget how to stop. But yeah, the fear over Y2K was huge. And the fear helped fuel the InfoSec industry because you had a lot of money going into technology at the time. And so while people are fixing this Y2K bug, they're also implementing security fixes. And as a result, in the early 2000s, you have a plethora of internet security companies that get founded. All of these companies are founded between the end of 1999, between 1999 and the end of 2000. And there's probably another dozen on here that I've forgotten about. You basically had the dot-com bubble and Y2K at the same time. And so money was like on trees. You could just like go pick it and, hey, I got a security company. Oh, here's some money. Oh, thank you. But you have to ask yourself, and this is where we go back to some of the previous slides I had, where did all the people come from that are running these companies? Right? There was no security industry before. You couldn't go to school and get a security degree. But suddenly we've got, a couple hundred security experts that are starting companies. Well, they're your hackers and freakers and people who got inspired by Wargames who were dialing BBSs, 10, 15 years before this. That's where they came from. Those are the people that have started your industry. Yes, Mr. Potter, I've been waiting for you. Yeah, I had a discussion with this from somebody, and I don't remember why I put them on there. But I think they were founded earlier, but they got big money in '99. I think that's what happened. I think they were around in the earlier 90s, but they got like a big Series B or something in. Yeah. So. No, please. So I built this deck 6 months ago. That explains it. Yeah. 6 months, history changes. No, and I asked a bunch of people, if you read my Twitter, which you don't, obviously. I asked a bunch of people what companies they remember, and somebody said ISS. I'm like, they didn't count then. And then they gave me a big, long explanation, and I looked it up, and it checked out. So, all right, you can take them off. I'll edit the slide right now. I'll remove it. it was really an interesting time in the industry because you had, at the time, you had McAfee, you had Symantec, you had some of the other big antivirus companies, and they were big, and they still are big, huge companies, but they were antivirus, right? There weren't really, and you had, a Checkpoint Firewall. There was a couple other companies like that were selling security products. But in 99, 2000, it was like a bomb went off, and boom, spread security companies all over the place, which is kind of what's happening today, right? You have the same sort of, I don't want to call it a bubble because the New York Times said it wasn't a bubble. But all the people that are populating these companies have been around for a while. And they had cut their teeth on bulletin board systems and whatnot. All right, so I wonder if anybody else remembers this political cartoon. Nobody? Anybody? This says Mafia Boy. Does that help? It doesn't help. So his name actually isn't Mafia Boy. His real name is Michael Calce, and he's from Quebec. And in early February of 2000, he launched DDoS attacks against Amazon and eBay and Yahoo and CNN and Dell and E-Trade and 9 of the 13 DNS root servers. He caused a lot of stuff to go down and become unavailable. He supposedly caused $1.2 billion in damage, global economic damages, right? And they caught him because he bragged about it on IRC. So yeah, don't brag about stuff on IRC. He was arrested about 15 years ago. He got 8 months in juvie. Oh, and a year of probation because he was in Canada. If he was in the U.S., he would have got the electric chair. But yeah, but he's had a pretty successful career since then, and he's rather well known in Canada. But the importance here is that again, I'm sorry, when was this? This was 2000. So we've just come off Y2K. We've just come off all this money put into the internet and these other companies, and he goes and takes down half the internet, basically. Yeah, he failed. He should have done the whole thing. But anyway, again, so we have awareness rising again. We have more money being put into security. We have the industry sort of, the bubble being perpetuated beyond January 1st, 2000. And of course, it crashed shortly thereafter that, and the industry consolidated dramatically. But also what happened in the early 2000s, by January 2002, you have the Trustworthy Computing memo from Bill Gates. Very, very important memo. Remember I listed all these worms? Blaster, MyDoom, Sasser, Code Red. They were coming out one after the other, after the other, after the other, and basically giving Microsoft a really bad amount of press. And Bill Gates finally, in January 2002, said, enough. We're going to change the organization of the company, and security is going to become number one. And so the memo indicated a shift change with inside Microsoft. Patch Tuesday begins 3 years later in July of 2005, which was, again, another big momentous thing for the industry because now you have a company who's going out of its way to patch stuff it's already sold for no more additional money, other than future purchases. And I think that's what Microsoft was trying to do here, was protect its future purchases, as opposed to not worrying about past purchases. I think that they got an earful from some of their bigger customers saying, you know, look, if you are not going to stand behind the stuff that we're buying, maybe we're not going to buy it anymore. Although, I don't know what else they would have bought, because there really wasn't anything else they could buy. Other big thing that happened in the early 2000s was PCI, the Payment Card Industry Data Security Standard. It really began as 5 separate standards, but PCI has done more to increase the basic security level of organizations than any other initiative, and has created an entire sub-industry of auditors. Right? You have now entire companies whose sole job it is to do PCI audits. And if you love doing audits, hey, great. I find that to be rather boring. But it is a very huge part of the overall information security industry. And while it doesn't really make people secure, it has raised the bar considerably so that it puts most people on at the minimum base level. So I put a slide in here and I have no notes for it. I don't remember why I did it. Oh, I do have notes, okay. Enron and WorldCom. Enron declared bankruptcy in 2001. WorldCom declared bankruptcy in July of 2002. Both of these companies used massive accounting fraud to basically book earnings that they didn't have and keep their stock price high. Both of these directly led to the passage of the Sarbanes-Oxley Act of 2002, otherwise known as SOX, or the Public Company Accounting Reform and Investor Protection Act. Basically, it says that internal controls must be assessed annually and reported to the SEC, and that the CEO and CFO will be held personally responsible with jail time. HIPAA also has jail time for medical information. And so this sort of means that companies now have to look at security as a little bit more of an important aspect because the security controls that they have in place have to be assessed every year. And again, we have another sub-industry of the information security industry arising who are doing auditing of companies to ensure that they're in compliance with the SOX requirements. Unfortunately, it hasn't really done a whole lot when you look at breaches like Target, Home Depot, etc. But again, we're looking at a bare minimum level of security compliance, raising the bar a small amount, and creating a sub-industry of the industry. All right, outside influences again. Late 2000s, the Sony BMG rootkit scandal of 2005. Basically, Sony included a piece of malware on audio CDs. So when you put the audio CD into your computer, it would install this software in the background as sort of a form of DRM, digital rights management, to try to prevent you from copying or ripping the audio. 22 million audio CDs this was on. This is where, now everybody thinks of Sony and security as that there was anonymous attacks a couple of years ago and wiped them out. Attacks on Sony began 10 years ago with the Sony BMG rootkit. People have been in and out of their network ever since. And to think that it was all Korea, no. But this is really, the Sony BMG rootkit was really the first indication that your vendor could introduce bad security into your environment. Sammy worm, 2005. Sammy Kamkar. He's actually pretty well known now. The guy's a pretty smart guy. I think he was. He had some probation, I think, where he couldn't touch a computer for a while, and now he's like defeating physical security things like motion detectors on doors and stuff. But anyway, the Sammy worm in 2005 said to be the fastest spreadest virus of all time. It's really just a cross-site scripting bug. Right? It flashed a message saying, "Sammy is my hero," and then made you his friend. He amassed over 1 million friends in less than 20 hours. For those of you that don't remember MySpace, it was the Facebook of its day. Just put it that way. It's still around, I think. You can still go to MySpace.com. And cross-site scripting is still one of the top 10 vulnerabilities that impact companies now. We still haven't fixed it. Anonymous. I don't know what to say about these guys. They were founded in 2003, target certified in 2008, gave rise to Lulzsec in about 2010. Anonymous, in my opinion, isn't really that big of a threat, but they've scared a lot of people. And they've made a lot of people spend a lot of money on security. And there are a lot of people using the anonymous name or operating underneath the anonymous name that aren't really quote anonymous. The thing is, anonymous isn't really a group or an organization. It's just a bunch of people who say, "Hey, I'm anonymous," and they do whatever they want. Lulzsec, on the other hand, was an actual group with an organizational structure and whatnot, and a mission and a goals. Anonymous is not that. There are still people now today who are running around claiming to be anonymous, but they don't have the same fear that they had 5 years ago. For a year or two, there were a lot of companies that were really afraid that they were going to be the next target of anonymous, and they spent a lot of money trying to make sure that didn't happen. More influences. Twitter. Early Twitter. Early Twitter was awesome. Just like early everything. But both of these events, Twitter and BSides, sort of helped ferment as Heidi was saying this morning, the community of information security. And that community, of course, works in the industry. And it's not just a few lone companies with products or individuals or admins with various skills. You actually have people sharing knowledge and communicating with each other because of both of these items. And I think if without Twitter and without BSides, you would end up with silos of corporations that don't talk or communicate outside themselves. And you would have, it would still be an industry, but it wouldn't be the community-driven industry we have now. And then we get some of the mega breaches. TJ Maxx, Heartland, lots and lots of credit cards. We can add, I think I have them on here later, but we have modern day, more modern day. More recent breaches such as Target and Home Depot. These massive breaches of credit cards show not only an evolution of the industry, but also an evolution of the attacker. They're really trying to monetize. Has to realize that if they have something that the attacker wants, they're going to have to spend some money and defend themselves. The Verizon DBIR, Verizon Data Breach Investigations Report. This is really a very influential report. Started in 2009. Very boring reading, but highly recommended reading for anybody in the industry because it's based on actual data. It's not marketing fluff. It's a little biased. I mean, it's only data from Verizon customers. And so as long as you read it with that sort of frame of mind, that you're going to have, that it's a subset of everybody, and take that information that they present, extract it in that way, it's very, very useful and can give you a very good picture of what's going on from your attack. Late 2000s. First publicly disclosed by Google in January 12, 2010, Operation Aurora. Also hit Adobe, Juniper, Rackspace, and others. This was big because it was really the first time anybody comes out and publicly blames China for anything. Whether China was actually at fault, who knows? Attribution is hard. We won't get into that. But this was 2010. This was 5 years ago. And only now is it become a political issue where China is attacking and asked to stop. But it was brought up as a major issue 5 years ago. But the other thing that this event did is it led to the funding of a lot of security startups. Folks like Dabala, FireEye, Mandiant, Watchdogs, OpenDNS, a couple others, they all basically got funding immediately after this event. And so you had another round of startups. Stuxnet. Stuxnet was big because it's not an industry thing, or it wasn't. It was a government thing, an espionage thing. I mean, it was discovered in 2010. Stuxnet was, for those of you that don't know, was targeted at Iran and their uranium enrichment machines, and was designed to either slow the machines down or give false readings so that the scientists who were working the machines thought they were broken and replaced them, or basically delay their progress. And it was discovered in 2010. It's still not completely understood yet, even now. In addition to Stuxnet, we also found Flame and a couple other ones. But this was state-of-the-art in 2005. Now, parts of Stuxnet are very elegant and svelte and awesome and a beauty to behold coding-wise. Other parts are not. Very kludgy, slapped together. But the fact that this was discovered in 2010, and you know it took a long time to develop, and it was probably state-of-the-art in 2005, you really have to wonder what governments are doing today, or what type of malware and stuff that they're using now. Because I know this isn't a one-off operation, and they got discovered and said, oh, let's close up shop, we're not doing this anymore. Yeah, that's not happening. All right. Rise of the APT, the Mandiant report. In February of 2013, Another watershed moment in the industry. We've had accusations against China before, but now we have a lot more detail 3 years later in the fact that China is much more organized than we believe, that it is probably nation-state sponsored. They actually come out and identify a specific military unit, and now we have the term APT to infect everybody's marketing materials. So as far as RSA is concerned, we still don't really know exactly what at RSA was compromised. They started replacing tokens in 2011 after an attack on Lockheed Martin that may have been related. And then, of course, SOPA, 2011-2012, Preventing Real Online Threats to Economic Creativity and Theft of Intellectual Property Act. They're missing some letters in their acronym. This resulted in massive online protests, DDoS attacks against supporter websites. A lot of other websites that support or were against it turned their websites black, and of course the bill was defeated. Unfortunately, they just keep trying in DC over and over again. So now we have CISA, which was recently passed. But this sort of woke up government and industry that the individual or the user was not going to sit around and do nothing. At least that's what they thought at the time. Of course, you get beat over the head enough times and you just start covering up, right? So that's how they did the system. Anyway, Snowden, June 2013. Love him or hate him, like patriot or hero or traitor. This guy has done more to promote information security than anyone else probably in the last 5 or 10 years. He basically gave a face to the insider threat. But he also fostered further distrust of government and crypto standards, and it really set the stage for the crypto war 2.0, which is currently being fought, waged, debated, or whatever word you want to use. Yeah. 2010, more big breaches. Target, Home Depot, there were a couple other ones around at the same time. The reason these are important, in addition to the previous ones, is that this is really the first time that a CIO or CEO was fired over security issues. This was the second breach for Home Depot. Their first breach was in 2011. And LulzSec, yeah, LulzSec was the, so like I mentioned, Sony had been, people have been in and out of Sony for like 10 years. Right. LulzSec had been defacing their property left and right since 2010, but now suddenly it's North Korea. But these three events really, since they happened so quickly, one right after the other, they really helped increase mainstream visibility, and they forced the president to say something and issue his executive orders. And the result, of course, was Congress felt that they had to act, and that's how we got CISA. Also in 2010s, we have the, mark your calendar. This was 2014. Rise of the vulnerability logo. In some cases, I think there was a penis. But this is the year that vulnerabilities got their own logos and became marketing vehicles, right, for companies that exposed them. 15 years ago, when I was finding vulnerabilities, this was unheard of. And this was really a big turn of events, at least in my mind, of what vulnerability information means and what can be done with it. A lot of these bugs had been around for years. They've existed in the code for 5, 10, 15 years, and nobody saw them. It kind of makes you wonder what else is out there. What else is in the code that we use every single day that runs the internet, that protects our credit cards, that is being exploited already and we don't even know about it. All right, the big one, OPM, Office of Personnel Management. I don't remember how many billions of records or zillions of records they lost. It was a lot. This impact of this breach has not been fully felt yet. It is still ongoing. It is massive inside the government. I forget her name. They fired her. She was the head of the OPM. No government agency wants to be the next OPM. They are running super scared right now. And you can basically walk into any agency, and if they have any budget, they will buy whatever security products you have. It's not that easy, but it seems that way sometimes. This is the fallout from this is still being felt and will be felt for the next couple of years. And if there's another breach anywhere near their size in the near future, that's going to be very scary. Another sub-industry. I talked about vulnerabilities with logos. As a result, we have companies dealing with vulnerabilities. Again, 10 years ago, this would have been unthinkable. Even dealing anything at all, charging money of any sort for vulnerability information was considered completely unethical. 10 years later, that has changed. Now we have bug bounties. Now we have people buying and selling 0 days. It's an entire sub-industry within the industry. This really started to gain legitimacy in 2010 with Google bug bounties. And of course, I don't know if you know who she is. This is Katie Malsoris. She used to work at Microsoft. She was very instrumental in getting Microsoft to pay out for bugs, because prior to that, prior to her efforts, they were like, no way, we're never paying a dime. And they're now one of the biggest contributors to bug bounties. She's now a CE something at HackerOne, where they basically run your bug bounty program for you. So we still have some notable holdouts in the bug bounty arena. Apple and Oracle come to mind. But this is now an entire sub-industry of the information security industry. Like the bug bounties and the buying and selling of vulnerability information. And it's amazing to me to watch this come about and to think, 10, 12, 15 years ago, this would have been unthinkable. And my last slide, which I added this week, for those that you don't know, I work for Tenable Network Security, and we just raised a $250 million round in Series B. I put that in there not to pimp my company, but this is the record amount ever raised by a security company. Previous record was $225 million by a company called AirWatch in 2013. They were later bought by VMware, which wasn't even InfoSec. It was a mobility management platform. But this $250 million is an obscene amount of money. I don't see any of it, unfortunately, outside my paycheck. But the fact that the industry has gotten to that point where you have that much money being invested in a startup is, I see that.
Yeah, well, we've only been around.
Yeah, we're a big startup. We got like 600 people. Okay, we're not 3 guys in a garage. But it's a lot of money, and it really indicates, it shows you where the industry has come from. From that first firewall sold by Jet, or that first firewall sold by Checkpoint, and now we're at $250 million for a Series B. It's huge. What am I doing on time? I'm gonna go through this slide real quick. I want to save a few minutes for questions. Future. Cyber war. Yes, I said cyber, get over it. Cyber espionage, right? Threat intelligence, which is not intelligent, and I could go on a rant on that, but I'm not going to. FUD. There's so much FUD. When I wrote this slide, it was right after planes started flying sideways, so that's why that's up there. Internet of Things is really going to be huge. Thankfully, there's a lot of noise about it right now, and I'm hoping that a lot of vendors are listening to that noise and developing their products appropriately. But when you have light bulbs that are going to launch attacks against your website, it's going to be an issue. APT on APT. That's interesting because you have the DARPA Cyber Grand Challenge, where I don't remember exactly what it is, but they want to have an automated system at a DEF CON CTF that can defend and heal itself with no human interaction. Yeah.
Next year.
Next year, right. That's coming up next year. Like, that is some scary shit right there. Scary and good, but scary, because if they can defend, they can also be offensive. Anyway, that's my last slide. Anybody got questions? I'd say 4 minutes for questions. So please, somebody raise your hand. Bruce has a question.
No.
All right. No questions. Yes.
When are we being replaced by insurance?
Yeah, insurance is a good point. No, that's a good question. Insurance, I think, is really going to drive the industry very soon. I didn't put anything about insurance in the slides, and I probably should have. But you're definitely going to see, you have cyber insurance now, and you have insurance companies who basically try to weasel out. I don't want to say weasel because they wrote the contract. But if you don't have all your I's dotted and all your T's crossed, they're going to be like, oh, you didn't implement this one control. We're not paying you for this breach. Or, oh, free credit monitoring wasn't covered in the terms of the agreement, so we're not covering the breach. But the insurance aspect is going to become big, especially with self-driving cars. Yeah.
How is SSL obviously broken?
How is what? SSL obviously broken?
Yeah.
Hopelessly broken.
There's a lot of big words around SSL being broken, so I'm a little worried about going to Amazon to find something right now.
Yeah, but you're only limited to $50. What's your problem?
What's what I'm saying?
It's not your liability. SSL, it's not SSL that's broken, it's the certs that go with the SSL and the issuing of the certs, right? Because you, what was the big scandal where Google found a cert issuing company?
Symantec.
Symantec, thank you.
Turns out Symantec.
Yeah, of course it's Symantec. Well, they got their start in antivirus, right? So yeah, it's not SSL, the protocol that's broken, it's the infrastructure that surrounds it. Sorry, folks. Any other questions? All right, I don't know what the next talk is, but I assume it starts here in a few minutes.